Hi, everyone. This is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. Be sure to check out our blog, our Facebook group, and subscribe to our channel. And our great sponsors, Phil Italy, Italy Rooting, and Abiativa Casa. And my guest today is chef, author, and filmmaker, Margie Raimondo. So welcome, Margie. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. My pleasure.
Oh, I'm glad to have you. You know, I just recently found that there's a large population of Italians in Arkansas.
Yeah, surprisingly, I grew up in California and moved here and accidentally figured out that there was a lot of Italians here. We were kind of a route that came from a lot of people who were in Louisiana who decided eventually to relocate, ended up in Arkansas.
So you're not from Arkansas, which I was wondering because you didn't have an accent.
No accent at all. I'm not sure what my accent is, but no, I grew up in an Italian neighborhood in southern Los Angeles. In fact, a neighborhood that was mostly immigrant families.
Oh, so how'd you wind up in Arkansas?
Oh gosh, we'll have to grab a martini for that discussion. But I was in high tech when I lived in California. I lived in the Silicon Valley area and I worked for Adobe Systems. And during 9/11, some really major things happened in my life. And eventually a couple years after 9/11, I said, you know what? It's time to make a big change in my life. One really significant thing that happened was I actually had a ticket in my possession to go on the plane that took themselves down. At the last minute, like 5 days before that flight, decided last minute to change my mind. I sent my engineer to the conference we were going to go to. And, of course, he died. And so that's a wake-up call for you. You have to kind of do a little self-reflection. And that was the biggest reason why I decided to leave my job in high tech and make a big change.
Oh, that's something. Both my wife and I we know several stories like that. And, you know, we've had friends that were killed.
I was a manager of many people in the company that I work for, Adobe, and we decided there were two people going to New York for a trade show in the Trade Center. So one of them was my director that worked for me. And so I decided, well, I hate to leave now because he's a brand new director. I really need to stay back and kind of watch his team, let him go and get to have the opportunity to go to this trade show. And so that's the reason why I didn't end up going on, off to my other meeting. And I sent my engineer for that. And then unfortunately, I lost both of those gentlemen. I lost the director in the, second tower. And then I lost my engineer in the plane. So it's a big day. And I decided that, it took me a couple of years to finally realize the impact it had on me emotionally because, I'm a strong woman. I was worried more about my team and also the families of the people that died and just trying to deal with all of that for a couple of years. But eventually I realized, you know what, this was a wake up call for me. I had to kind of reevaluate what do you want to do? Where do you want to go with your life now? You've spent many years being very successful in high tech. So what's the next phase of your life? And what happened.
So that's when you discovered that this was the thing to do, is get in touch with the Sicilian roots and do that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really kind of the path. So I didn't know anybody in Arkansas. Really, I probably never even driven through the state, but I went to school in TCU for my undergrad work. And so I knew that I liked that area and I was looking around for where would I move if I left California and started looking never looked at Arkansas until one of my friends said, hey, you should go to the Ozarks. It's so beautiful. It's everything that you want. You want a simple life. You want nature. You want people who, really care about the environment they're living in, traditions. So go check it out. And I did. I took a very short weekend in the Ozarks in Arkansas, and I was just blown away at the beauty. And, it took another 6 months or so for me to finally decide, because at the beginning I was pretty skeptical, but I moved here in 2006 and I really, really love it. And I ended up, realizing that there's a lot of Italians here. And I was just so pleased to find that out. And it's everything that I always wanted it to be. So I've been here for a long time now and I love it. It's really nice.
My last interview was Italian from Milan. And, Yeah, I mean, he did a whole thing on the immigration of Italians in the South, and plantations and all that kind of stuff. It's really, really, really fascinating. Really,
Yeah,
really
that's
cool.
right.
So, where's your family from? I know that. I think you said your dad's family's from Sicily, right?
Correct. My dad's family's from Sicily, from a very small village in the very central part of Sicily called Price. And then my mom's family is from Campania, Caserta, so in that area of Naples. And so, yep, both parents' families immigrated from Italy to America, and they met up.
Now, did they both go straight to California, or did they?
No, no. My father's family originally moved to Pueblo, Colorado. Now that's an area that you should go and explore because there's a lot of immigrants that came from Sicily and went to Pueblo. And so my father's family first immigrated there and then eventually then went to California. My mom's family from Naples, they all ended up in Ohio and in Pennsylvania. So that's where they settled. And then my mom's mother and father basically moved to California because my mom's mother had pretty severe heart problems. And the doctor said, you need to get out of the cold weather, get to somewhere warm. So that's why she moved to California. And so that's how they ended up both in California.
Yeah, and the air was probably clean back then.
Yes, that was probably
That's probably why they was.
smog everywhere. Yes, yes, absolutely. My father's family, my mom's family lived in, in the Southern California area as well. But my father's family lived in the south part of Los Angeles, and it was all immigrant area. So it was, African American, 70%, and then 30% immigrants, mostly from Italy, but from other places as well. So I grew up in a really cool neighborhood, actually. Just a neighborhood with a lot of immigrants and everybody, there were a lot of Italian roots and everyone, really reflected on their traditions from the past. And that's what shaped my childhood.
Yeah, no, the same thing here. That's basically it. I tell people when we were growing up, you didn't say Italian American. You just said it. If somebody asked you, what are you? You said Italian.
Italian.
Right.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. I mean, it's really, I grew up just like probably you, where you just were the tables where everything happened, right? You had the fresh ingredients because my family actually ripped out the front yard, the backyard, and planted all the vegetables. And so we had this little backyard, which is our little paradise. We had our fresh goodies and our fresh vegetables. And, you always had tomatoes and basil and peppers. And then you gathered around the table and then you ate all the time. In fact, you were having one meal and talking about the next meal. That's pretty much how we grew up. But it was like we were poor. But you never knew you were poor because there was always food. There was always laughter. There was always family around. And, it took me decades as an adult for me to finally realize not everybody that I called aunt and uncle were my aunts and uncles, but they were all aunts and uncles. Zia, Zio. But you were like, later on, you're like, oh, you mean I'm not really related to that person? Well, not by blood.
Yeah. Well, my, one of my cousins that I met in Italy, he's actually my dad's first cousin, half first cousin, but he's younger than me. So, and he told me I have to call him Zio Nicola because because out of respect, even though I'm older, he's my dad's first cousin.
Yeah, exactly. That's just the way it is. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we had always at my grandmother's house. There were always people coming and going. And they're like, "Who's that?"
Yeah.
Oh, that's so and so. Is a cousin, sister's aunt's uncle, whatever.
Yeah. The pat answer was either it's a cousin, an aunt, or an uncle. Boom.
Yeah. Right.
And so, yeah, you were like, okay, just accepted it. But
and the other thing was, when we would go to the beach, we didn't go with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. We went with eggplant parmesan, sausage and pepper.
Exactly. Same way. I grew up exactly the same way. Yeah, you wouldn't dare eat peanut butter and jelly.
So I love when I find somebody like, that has all the same background. When you brought your friends over that weren't Italian and they saw all the food, what was their reaction?
Well, first of all, I love to tell this story. You bring somebody over for the first time to any one of the, dinners. And the first thing they do is lean over and go, does everybody hate each other? Why are they yelling at each other? What's wrong? I mean, what? I'm like, oh, they're happy. That's how we talk. We're loud and if you don't talk loud, you can't talk over your brother or your cousin. So number one, they're always shocked by how much noise there is in the room. And then then they make the mistake of, oh my gosh, this is so good. I'm going to keep eating. Like, no, slow down. Basta, slow down. And then they're like, why? But it's so good. Trust me. Then the next course comes out and they're like, God, there's so much food. How do you do this? I'm like, just stand up and move around a little bit, but hang on, stay close to the table. There's another course coming that way. They're always so surprised, but pleasantly surprised, of course.
Yeah, no, I know. That was always fun to watch when the non-Italians came over. And they would just be shocked by how much food. And same thing, my mother's family they were 9 brothers and sisters, and they would meet once a month they would go around to everybody's house. And they used to call it the family meeting and everything like that. And it was like you said, it was just this free for all. And we got to be, when we were kids, 9, 10, 11, 12, we were the bartenders. And my uncles, they give you get them a beer and they give you $1 or something like that. But it was, I always tell people I had 9 sets of parents.
Yeah.
Because they, you couldn't get away with anything, first of all.
Absolutely no.
You get, slap on the back of the head or whatever, and you didn't dare raise your voice or say something to your aunt or uncle because that was death.
No. Or anybody in the neighborhood. And I grew up again in this neighborhood with a lot of different families, and you do one thing wrong down the road and you're being scolded all the way till you get home. And then your mom's waiting there with her slipper or wooden spoon or something. I mean, she already knows before you walk in because she's already been told what's happened. You're like, oh gosh. But fortunately, it happened to the boys more than the girls because the girls, we didn't do a lot of things wrong. But I can remember many a day, my brother riding up on his twin bike, my mom standing there ready with her little wooden spoon. It was like, well, everybody knows what's happening.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, that's a
funny story about your the alcohol, the bartender. So my great grandfather, I should say, when he came from Sicily, he brought some rootstock, and he planted all of our wine, and so we made our own wine. So even eventually my grandfather was the winemaker. I mean, not great wine, but Italian Dago wine. And so we'd have this wine, and we had a wine cellar and everything. And so, we were kind of the bartenders too, that we used to fill these big carafes, and then you'd bring them down to the table and you set them on the table. And there's all of us, all children have some story about getting down in the wine cellar and filling up a cup and getting drunk, and then you're in trouble. But then you only do it once because you're throwing up everywhere after that. And then you're like, okay, I don't think I want to do that again. Well, maybe boy.
My cousin fell in. He fell in the barrel once.
Oh my God.
Young. Yeah, luckily they got him out.
Oh my God.
I don't know how they found out because, like I said, it was down there. So, but I remember we always used to get, like Christmas and Easter, you get the glass of water with some little bit of wine in it,
yeah,
and things like that. And my uncle, my godfather, was giving me espresso when I was like, I don't know, 8.
Yeah, my Nona would give me the espresso with a lot of sugar, or mostly sugar and a little bit of espresso. Yeah, it was kind of thick and you drink it. But and then did you learn how to drink your wine in those little juice glasses? That's how we drank it, like those, they were like jelly jars.
Yeah, the jelly jars.
Yeah, the jelly jars. And then you started out as a kid drinking, half water, half wine in those little jelly jars. And then, eventually a little less water until you became old enough to just drink the straight stuff. But yeah, we all drank that way, especially before church, because my mom would always make the frittata before we go to church and give us a little wine. So she'd say, okay, this will settle your legs so we wouldn't move around. If there's anything.
They're for jail if you do that. They'd be calling the...
Probably. Yeah, but we all grew up that way, right?
Yeah, and even that was kind of the rite of passage when you at these meetings, because when you're in New York, you could drink at 18. So when you finally got 18, then you got to sit at the table. And I'm sure you had the kids' table, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't know if that's just an Italian thing, but it seems like it is.
I don't know, but I remember it well, yes. And then I, as an adult and having children, I had the kids' table. And I still now have grandkids and I do kids' table. I don't know. You can't break some traditions.
Yeah, no, but those are, but that's great. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of those traditions are leaving. And, everybody's so far away now, especially in my family. And of course, my family's getting much older and,
Yeah,
grand nieces and nephews. I know some of them, some of the younger ones you don't even know.
I know.
So let's talk a little bit about, I know you've written a couple of books. If you put your recipes out there on videos. And so how did that all come about? Why'd you start cooking? Because I like to cook. I do all the cooking here.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well, I always go back to my upbringing in this Los Angeles neighborhood where, I grew up with this garden, always growing up and surrounded by a close-knit family of immigrant families. We always were constantly cooking. So because we didn't have a lot of money, then that's what we did. We'd make sauces, bread every single morning. You couldn't wait to be tall enough to get on the chair so you could reach the counter and cook with your nona. Like that was so special during those times. I remember all of those things. And, they really shaped who I am as a person. When I, as I mentioned earlier, kind of left high tech because of some really big dramatic things happening in my life, I kind of was evaluating what should I do next. And I realized what was missing because of that experience in 9/11 was my soul had this empty spot in it. And I wasn't really sure. I was really struggling. You're an executive in a software company. You're really, you have a lot of, accomplishments. I had several degrees and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden you're faced with what do I do next? And so I thought the logical thing would be for me to go be a politician or a professor. That seemed like the logical transition for me. But the more I would think about doing that, the more I'd be like, no, I still feel empty. I still feel empty. So I did some thinking about it and I thought the thing that I need the most, the time in my life that I felt like I was full, like my soul felt full, was that time, reflecting back to my childhood. And I thought, well, how do I turn that into a career? I don't know. So that was really the thing that prompted me to kind of decide and now I'm living in the Ozarks at this point. So I decided, okay, I want to connect back to my roots. I think I know about my childhood and the Italian roots, but I really didn't know until I went and lived abroad. So I did a program called Farm Away. It's currently called Work Away now in Europe, but it was called Farm Away. And I basically went and lived with families for 16 months, and you lived on farms. You had to have a commitment of at least a week. You could go as long as 3 weeks on each farm, living literally in the family's house. And you worked in the kitchen or in the garden, or you could do both. And so I thought, this is perfect for me. So as a child, you live that experience, and only some of it you could grok later on. But living in that environment brought me right back. It's almost like grounding me back into the earth again. And so that was that was the transition that brought me to the point where I am today. I did that for 16 months. Lived all over Italy, a couple of places in southern Spain. When I came back, I said, okay, I need to do this. This is my next life. So I moved to Central Arkansas, Little Rock. I left the Ozarks and I came to Little Rock. And then I'm now living on a very small urban farm. Makes sense because that's what I did in Los Angeles. And I built a small teaching kitchen based on the European model of like a farmhouse. And so I'm teaching people cooking classes, preservation classes, having dinners here. And that's when I wrote my book, Mangiamo, Let's Eat. And, this is really the career now. And my heart is full. My heart is full again. And I know I'm in the right space, in the sweet spot that I need to be in right now in this time of my life. So I'm pretty happy. It's really neat.
That's great. And that whole program, that's why I like doing this, because I learned something, but also, Who knows about these things? How did you find out about that?
Well, I contacted my cousin in Sicily and I said, okay, I need to heal. Basically, I'm so messed up in the, like I can't get the vision of all the things that happened to the people who died, and all the recreation. Every time you look at that period, you'd look at the screen and there was pictures of everything that happened in 9/11. I'm like, I got to get out of here. I need to get away from this, and I need to just really get to heal. And I said, and he goes, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to cook. I just really want to cook. I want to cook and do the things I did as a child. And so he said, okay, let me see what I can do. So what happened was, the way I got into the Farm Away program is he had his wife's family owned this fishing boat company, and they used to take fishermen out. And this is actually a terribly funny story. Now, in retrospect, it's funny. At the time, it wasn't that funny. So he said, well, he talked to him and he said, well, I think what I can do is talk to my brother-in-law. He can put you on the fishing boat, and then you can, cook on this fishing boat. You can be the chef that's on that fishing boat with him, with the other chef, and you can be there, and, that way you can learn some things. And so we'll put you on the boat for like 3 weeks. So I said, okay, that sounds great. Fly to Sicily, one-way ticket. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know this feels right. So I know Italian, well enough to order things in the restaurant or get myself around a hotel at this point. So, and especially don't know Sicilian at this point. So we go, I get on the boat, my cousin drops me off, I get on this fishing boat, and then we're there getting out to the water. And then that day, people start fishing. And then at lunchtime, the chef who's talking to me in Italian, very slowly, but the captain, basically, he's the chef captain. And he says, okay, he brings me this huge tuna, and he starts saying in Italian, break it down, break it down. And I'm trying to think, I'm looking at it. I'm like, I know he's saying break it down, but what does he mean? I don't know what's going on. So I called my cousin and I said, Chito, what is he trying here? Talk to him. What is he trying to tell me? And so he says, you have to break down the fish. You need to cook the fish. And I said, I don't know how to break down a big tuna that's, the size of a car. And I said, I can't do that. I don't know what to do. And I start crying. And so I'm very emotional at that point. So I cry. So they have this long conversation, the captain and him, who happens to be his brother-in-law. So Chiro gets back on the phone to me and says, okay, he's going to give you 2 days of lessons. He's the captain chef, right? He's been doing it. He said, I'm giving you 2 days to learn this. And then after that, you're on your own. I'm not going to help you. This is what the chef tells him, the captain tells him. And then he says, and also there's no crying on my boat. So after that 3 weeks on that boat with him, I learned a lot about fish and how to prepare it. I can break down any size fish you want to throw at me, Buster. But at the same time, he told me about this captain told me about this program called Farm Away, and said, if you really want to learn the Italian cuisine and understand truly farm to, field to farm, you can do this very easily. And so he told me about it, and then we just got signed up. It's kind of a European thing, or it's not. I don't know of anything in America that does this. It's been changed from Farm Away to now it's called Work Away. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I never heard of it before. That's
yeah.
thing. And now do you have to pay for it?
They pay you to work on farms by giving you lodging and food.
Wow.
But you have to commit
to at least
1 week per time up to, on the farm, it was 3 weeks. I think it's longer now, but you had to have at least 1 week. And then you had to guarantee that you'd work so many hours. I decided to do the program where it was on the field and also in the kitchen. So my days were 12 hours, 6 days a week. So I had to do 6 hours in the field and 6 hours in the kitchen. And so let me tell you, I chased a lot of chickens. I got a lot of eggs. I learned how to milk sheep and also goats. I can also shear sheep. So in case you need that skill, let people know. I can shear sheep. I learned how to break down fish. I learned how to, multiple different kinds of pork because, pork is a big thing there. I learned a lot about preservation because you think in your head, stuff, but then you realize when you live it every day, it's completely different than what you see on television. And so, people who have, for instance, I thought when I went to this one farm that that was basically a farm for peaches, a peach orchard. And I thought, okay, well, that means I'm going to make jelly for the next 3 weeks. No, you don't just make jelly out of peaches. You have to preserve them so that you have there's a lot of bartering that goes on and people want fresh or half peaches to be able to barter in the neighborhood, but also not everything's going to be jelly. You need to preserve them so that they're whole, so that they're halves, so that they might be savory. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways. You dry them, use the pit. I mean, they use everything. So I learned so much about preservation of food.
I mean, that's fantastic for young people, especially that want to get into that field.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, not at my age, but maybe, 10 years ago or something like that, that would be like a vacation almost for me.
Yeah. Yeah, a vacation.
I don't think I could do 12 hours a day. I could probably do 6 in the kitchen.
Yeah, that's it. You're tired. You're ready for, yeah. And I was in my late 40s. I was in my late 40s when I went. So I was, right on the cusp of, but I enjoyed it and I needed that. I needed that.
But you know what's cool about that? Because when we were in Calabria and they, this was one of the hometowns and go up in the mountain and nothing was bought. Everything was made.
Exactly.
So I hear what you're saying. I mean, that's the real key to the whole thing. They're not buying things wrapped in plastic.
Oh no. I mean, it's truly field to fork. It's absolutely field to fork. And listen, even if you only produce peaches, you still have all the local food because you did bartering back and forth with your neighbors. And so, I'm sure you've heard the term 0 kilometers. And that is truly the way that they live in Europe. They have a circle of maybe what we call 25 miles. And they try to buy everything in that local area, which also improves the economy. It's very good for our health. It's, sustainable. So I learned a lot about that, truly a lot about that. At that point, of course, farm to table was a marketing term in America. So I thought I knew what that meant, but no, it's nothing like true, field to fork in Europe. And even today, that's very true today.
Well, yeah, I mean, we were driving around the last trip and, the driver pointed out a fruit stand or it was kind of like a store, but open air type. And he said, see, he doesn't need any refrigeration because whatever he buys today is gone tonight. And then tomorrow he goes and gets more.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's why everything is so fresh over there. And that's why, people say, you don't gain as much weight there because they don't put all that junk in it.
No fillers. No fillers.
Yeah.
And they're also moving. I mean, that's the other part of the equation is you realize that they move. They're walking all the time. They're walking up steps all the time. They don't have elevators. They're working in the garden. I mean, they're moving around, and that's the other aspect of it that's highly important and also, this whole thing around blue zones and there's a lot of hype about that. But the true aspect of Mediterranean lifestyle is not just the food. It's connecting to people. I go back to my childhood and realize we were so poor, but who knew that? You didn't know. I have such great memories as a child because you always, just like we've already talked about earlier, you heard laughter all the time. And so you chase the laughter. Who's laughing at what? Okay. And then, you go and follow that conversation and there's always somebody to play with. You didn't have any toys, but you didn't need to because you came up with creative ways to play with the cousins or, play with each other. And it was great. It was good. Something that still exists in Europe today is that connection to family, connection to friends, time. They take time. They still do the siesta in the middle of the day. Why? Because it's really important to make sure that they have a connection to their family and to the community. And I love that. That's why I spend so much time there now. I love that. I wish it would happen here in America, but
Yeah.
I don't see it happening.
I love that.
It used to be like that, and I'm sure that you miss it.
Yeah, oh, no question about it. I love that phrase, "chase the laughter." That's I'm going to steal that. But yeah, no, that's exactly it. I didn't. My grandparents and some of my cousins lived it was almost 100% Italian. I didn't live that far away, but
Yeah.
we were always outside. I mean, in the summertime, you went out at 9 o'clock in the morning, maybe earlier, and didn't come back. And you came back for lunch.
Yeah.
And then you came home for dinner, and then you came home when the street lights came on.
That's right. 100% there. Same thing.
Yeah, there was.
That's it.
And snow day, you didn't sit around in the snow day looking at a phone. You couldn't wait to get out and play. Well, you didn't have snow, but we couldn't wait to get out into the snow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we didn't have snow where we were, but you always got out. You always got out, no matter what. There was something to do. There was someone to, some activity going on. And yeah, it's not like that anymore. Everybody just kind of sits in front of a screen, or whether it's the computer or whether it's their phone, and they barely, we've lost the art of communication. We have.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's frightening. How do you bring it back? I don't know.
Well, somebody said to me, actually, she just got a citizenship. She's in Sicily, and Kristen Herzog, and it was fun talking to her because she had, a lot of the similar things that you were saying. It's a whole different world. It really, really is.
It is.
So with
my grandkids, we do this stuff still. We still do this with our kids, with my kids and grandkids. We still cook. We still make pasta. We plan our vacations and our holidays together in the kitchen. What are we going to cook? What are we going to make? What do you want to make? I always check in with each one of the 4 grandkids. All right, well, Mimi's there. What do you want to make? What do you want to do? And so I do that all the time. And, they all come up with, don't forget, I want my cheesy eggs. And, so they always put in their little recipes. Even my son-in-law, he'll say, when we're together on Christmas, I want to make sure you make me this. And so I think it's a really important part of it. And I have a strict rule. Do not bring that cell phone to the table. Do not get up. Do not, once we sit down, you don't get back up till everybody's done. You don't rush off and go somewhere else. Like, I still enforce that a little bit. But I don't really have to now because they're in their teen years and they're so used to it and they also enjoy it. So we go around and we talk now, like we'll say, okay, highlight, low light. That's one of the things we do after dinner, okay, so tell me, we do that very, my 2 daughters and my grandkids and us will always be like, okay, what's your highlight today? What's your low light? And so it stimulates conversation and communication. It's a very important part of eating. It's the other part is because eating is the celebration of life, right?
Yeah.
Eating is a celebration of life. So you got to live. And that's the thing I like to do with my family. And even when I have parties here, when I have dinners, same thing. You come to my restaurant here, you come and eat at at Urbana Farmstead. Don't bring that cell phone out because I'll come right up to you and say, put that thing away. You're messing up my food. Put that away.
Speaking about messing up food, my wife did the test. She wanted to test it out. No cheese on seafood in Bari. Yeah. She got yelled at.
That's funny. Yeah.
No cheese. Yeah. No cheese.
No cheese. No cheese. Here's a fresh limone. Yeah.
And I said, she said, I wanted to see what they were going to do. I said, okay, well, now you know.
Now you know. Yeah, no cheese, no really cheese.
Funny. So what kind of things, when you do your online recipes, what kind of things do you cook?
So I have a Mediterranean cooking club. And so I try to stick with everything Mediterranean. From Sicily, that island was dominated by so many different cultures. So it's such a melting pot. And so I tend to be much more Sicilian than Napolitano. Although when it comes to baking, I usually use my mom's recipes. But people always want to learn how to do different kinds of pastas. So we do some pastas, but not necessarily just cutting pasta and, like fettuccine. Cannellonis, I'll make those. Those are always really popular. I do love to make a lot of really great salads because I'm a farm here and I grow a lot of vegetables. So I try to teach people how to use fresh vegetables, whether they're growing them or they get them from their local farmer's market, and to make up prep a salad that you can use, prep the different ingredients, and you can add different things throughout the week and use that same salad base to make many different things. One other thing I love to teach and people need to learn more about is how to make proper stock. So usually Sunday, Monday, I'll make a couple of stocks, and then that's my pantry for the week. So those can be transformed from stocks into a nice broth for a soup, or it can be used to flavor other types of meats and things that I'm using for the rest of the week. I might even add a little bit of good stock, to make a nice salad dressing. Depends on what the ingredients are in the salad itself. I teach people about those things. So real basic food, prep goes a long way in being able to create healthy meals all week long. So that's kind of the style of what I teach and what I post. And of course, then there's the famous focaccia. So everybody wants to know, I make a very interesting focaccia. And so everyone always wants to learn how to make that. And then they mostly want to just come here and eat my focaccia. They don't really want to make it themselves. But yeah, so focaccia, bread making is always a big thing. I do some desserts. In the summertime, we'll do cannolis, and we'll do gelato. I'll teach people how to make a gelato. And so it's a variety, but definitely Mediterranean, very Mediterranean.
Yeah, I went to the New York restaurant school 40 years ago or something like that, because I was in banking, and not that I really was worried, but there was, they were laying off a lot of people, and my wife said, we didn't have kids or anything. She said, why don't you go? So I went for a year, every Saturday and Sunday for a year.
Wow.
But to your point, people don't realize what goes into making a stock and how much better it makes everything taste. I mean, not that I do it, now, but what I did do is I did do some tomatoes this year, and I froze them. I peeled them, chopped them, and froze them in things. And whenever I wanted, fresh tomatoes, I could grab them. But yes, our teacher, I think it was the second class we had, second or third, where he had us making all the sauces and things like that. And we were making all of those sauces, and he was going around the room tasting them. And he had a big pot, and he threw a chicken in there, and he threw beef, and he's throwing all kinds of things in there, and he's putting these sauces in there. And I'm watching him do this, and I'm going, boy, this is going to be awful. It was the best pasta I ever ate.
See, there you go.
But I got to teach him how to make pasta, because he was trying to tell them to put the flour and everything in a bowl. And I said, no, you don't put it in a bowl.
Put it right on the counter.
And you break the eggs, and he goes,
absolutely.
Where'd you learn that? I said, my grandma.
Yeah.
So from that point on, that's how he taught.
Yeah. And it's so funny when you say that, because I teach that's probably my number one most popular classes, learning how to make pasta, and so we'll make the pasta on the counter and all this stuff. And so every so often somebody will say, but can I use my KitchenAid? And I don't even respond. I just give them that side eye look, like, and they know better. I'm like, no. Then I say, no, you cannot use, technically you could use your KitchenAid, but the problem is it's not going to taste good.
No.
And then they're like, well, why wouldn't it taste good? Because these hands are the best tools you have in the kitchen. And these hands are full of love and passion. And if you don't use these hands, guess what? You're going to have terrible, terrible pasta. You have to use these hands, because these are the love and the passion that you're adding. That's the secret ingredient. Okay.
I learned that with the pizza dough, because I was trying to make it with the KitchenAid, and there was just, and I got the recipe from the bakery in Corona that my uncle used to make, and then I said, I'm just gonna do it by hand and see what happens. And to your point, it's so much better.
It is.
The consistency is just different, because I think and I think also when you do it that way, it gets too hot, and the dough doesn't rise right, and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree with you.
so yeah, and the pasta, but I can't roll it out like my uncle. My uncle used to be able to roll it out, that thin little pasta sheet. I can't do that.
Yeah. I can still do it though, because I teach it like every single week. So I can still roll it. And I have a lot of students. We have the pasta machines, but you can also roll it. I make everybody roll out one piece so they can try it. But what's so cool is that I still have some of my participants will actually do the entire pizza dough or pasta dough with the roller and cutting themselves. And I'm so proud of them when they do that. But then others usually use the pasta machine. So you can do a little bit of both.
My uncle Frank, he had the big board with the big dowel, and he could roll that out like it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. It's good.
And then he would cut. My grandmother didn't eat the ravioli. He would cut up. But it was linguine, but she would say lagana. That's the way she would. That's how the way she would. And my grandmother, you couldn't put anything within my grandmother's reach, because she would eat it.
That's
But when we were on the big table with everybody,
love it.
there would always be like a semicircle by my grandmother where you couldn't put food.
Love it. Love it. Love it. You know, and what's so great about food is it's like such a equalizer, you know, like as I travel throughout Italy all the time and I cook with different people or I might go eat at someone's house, you know, I appreciate the stories, the beautiful stories behind every dish. And I always say, what I say, and I think I even said in my cookbook is, you never cook alone. You might be in the kitchen alone, but you never cook alone, because guess why? There's always a memory. There's always something special you think about. You know, it may be that you're making the biscottes and you're thinking about your Aunt Vivian who taught you that. Or, you know, you're making this special sauce and then you think, oh, you know, I love the stories behind Aunt Genevieve's or my mom or somebody. So you never cook alone because you're always connecting yourself to the culture and to the stories that some recipe makes. And, you know, this happens every single day. And that's what I love about it.
Yeah, and I think back, because we were always at my grandmother's house, and my grandmother lived with my aunt and uncle, but my mother was always there, and my other Aunt Mary was always there.
Yeah.
And I to this day I can't figure out how these women got so much food out of this little 4-burner kitchen to feed 50, 60 people.
I know.
I don't know how they did it.
I know.
And they would, it would be hot. There was no air conditioner. It'd be hot. They'd be fried eggplant, But, it was never a chore for them.
Mm-mm.
They loved it because they love feeding the family. And
Yeah.
that's my one of my fondest memories, is them always being in the kitchen. I think because I spent so much time there with my mother, that's where we sat. We sat in the kitchen while they were cooking, And my grandmother had one tan arm and one white arm because she used to sit on the window like this.
Yeah. That's so funny. And, it's funny that you say all that, because I have my childhood memory of what my Nona's kitchen looked like. And then I guess that was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, my daughters said, Mom, you talk so much about this great neighborhood. Let's go there and just walk around and let's see what it's like. So we went to, we walked around Southgate where we lived in Linwood, but my grandparents lived in Southgate. So we walk around the neighborhood where my great grandparents lived and grandparents lived. And I said, let's just knock at the door. And I want to just see, because the house pretty much, they actually don't have a garden in the front yard anymore like we did, but it looked pretty close to the same and didn't have a lot of improvements. So the lady said, come in. And so she lets me walk around and then she takes me into this little back area. And then I look at the area and I'm like, it's my grandmother's kitchen. I remember it being huge table and a huge stove. And then I look at it and I'm like you said, a little 4-burner stove, and the space was so small. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, wow, how did she do that? How did she feed all of us? Cause just a casual dinner was 30 people. And you're just thinking, how in the world did they accomplish that? but they did.
Yeah, and my grandmother, when like Christmas Eve, when there was a million people there were 4 seats in the kitchen. And my grandmother always had one, right?
Yeah.
And usually my oldest uncle and maybe one of my aunts, and then everybody else. That was it. They were.
I know.
You were standing.
Yeah.
Were there.
Yeah. Well, we had all of our dinners. My grandfather built these picnic benches, huge picnic benches, and then you probably did the same thing. They converted the garage, which never had a car in it, because that area in the garage was actually where we ate. It's like an outdoor kitchen, and we'd have all of our, because the house wasn't big enough for that many people.
Yeah, in the summer, I don't know who built it. I guess it was. I remember it ever since I was a little kid. They had what they called it was a barak, not Barack Obama, but a barak, which was like a gazebo type of thing, but rectangular. And same thing. There was a table there with some benches and things like that. But the hierarchy was always same thing. The oldest aunts and uncles got to sit there. The cousins, we got to sit out in the sun, but the older cousins got to actually sit in chairs. And then there was a wall going down to the cellar, which the smaller kids would either sit there or sit over by. There was a little grapevine thing. But our parents hated when you sat on that wall going to the cellar, because if you fell over backwards, they were scraping you up off the pavement.
Yeah.
But there was always that hierarchy, and then, you kind of, just like when you graduated from the kids' table, you kind of moved through.
Yeah.
So now you also have a little documentary, I guess, about Sicily, right?
That's right. L'anima di Sicilia, the soul of Sicily. In 2021, I went to Sicily carrying some videography and also a couple of people helping me. And we filmed for about 21 days. And the film is basically a film about farmers and food producers. And it's showing how they're currently still farming and producing food, but still clinging to the traditions. The traditions of farming generationally, but also the traditions of how to prepare food. Just like we've been talking about, just like what I experienced when I did the Farm Away program. They want to make sure that they continue to use the recipes generationally, and also just the methodology from the past, because that's so important. An example of that I learned during filming this documentary is around pasta. And how, now industrial pasta, it is made and then they dry it in 3 or 4 hours. They quickly dry it. Well, when you do that, that starch converts to sugar. But the traditional ancient way to do it is to dry it over a period of 24 to 36 hours. And then in that case, the integrity of the starch is never compromised. It doesn't turn into sugar. So then that's okay, because the glycemic level is low. And so people with diabetes can actually eat the pasta. It doesn't affect them. So I learned a lot of those types of things during filming. And then I wrote this, the script about it. And then I went back and I wrote this film, made this film called The Soul of Sicily.
Sicily is the largest island in the Mediterranean. The land and its caretakers are the real soul of the island. Agriculture and tourism are facing increasingly volatile weather and more extreme events like floods, wildfires, droughts, and declining biodiversity. These conditions limit the availability of water, allowing weeds, pests, and fungi to thrive, which all reduce crop productivity. Farmers are under continued pressure to shift to agrobiodiversity initiatives, technological solutions for water conservation, and economic development through slow tourism and value-added food production without disrupting heritage traditions. Urgent transformation is needed that allows farmers to adapt and develop climate-smart solutions, contributing minimal emissions.
It's won a lot of awards. In fact, I'm going to Virginia at the end of next month. I'm going to go get an award for the Film of the Year at a film festival. And I've won probably close to 60 awards internationally. I've been to multiple places, Sorrento, Rome, London. I've I've gone there and the film has been shown even without me there on a number of different occasions. So it's really, and it's timely because it also addressed the idea of climate changes and how, knowing that Sicily has had so much drought and so many really bad fires. And this is, having to adapt to the changes also are some of the things that they're facing, like other farmers around the world. But in face of all of that, they still are holding on to the most important thing about farming, which is traditions.
That's really cool. That's really so before we go, where can people find your cookbooks? Where can they see the video, and where can they find you if they want to ask you a question?
Yeah. So you can, I have a website called Urbana Farmstead. It's www.urbanafarmstead.net. Urbana is URBANAFARMSTEAD.net. And you can find all my resources there. So you can see the documentary there. You can click to go see the documentary there. It's also, you can buy the book there. I have other types of things like imported oils and tea blends, things that I make here on the farm. I also sell both my books on Amazon. So you can look me up under author Margie Raimondo, Raimondo. And that you can find my books there. And you can connect up with me anytime by contacting me at urbanafarmstead@gmail.com. So yeah, come on and ask any questions. I'm always glad to share some of my stories or some of my recipes. And I mostly love to hear about your stories as well.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I'm sure everybody's going to be going there. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate it.